I am really excited to be here today with Theo Boyd. She is the author of the book, My Grief is Not Like Yours. And it's a fantastic telling of her experience with grief at losing both her mother and then her father. And Theo, thank you so much for speaking with me today and for sharing your experience with grief. You've learned a lot, and I'm really, really excited for what you have to share. But before we get into that, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself, a life sketch?
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me. Well, I'll start with my name. I've had it since I was born. My mom and dad were going to call me Thelma Elizabeth. And at the last minute, my mom had told me that daddy decided to combine it. So I have one first name, one last name, no middle name. Daddy said, nope, her first name's long enough. They called me Thelizabeth, and it's spelled T as in Tom, H as in Harry, Elizabeth. Thelma and Elizabeth combined, Thelizabeth. Well, just imagine a second grade girl learning how to write cursive and writing that at the top of your paper at school, and everybody else was already finished with their homework or their work, and I was still writing my name. And so sixth grade rolled around. I was blessed to go to the same school district my entire school life, which was Whitney in Whitney, Texas. And so I had some of the same friends from kindergarten till graduation. But in sixth grade, these friends got together and they decided, I'm tired of saying her name, Elizabeth. And they just started calling me Theo.
Oh,
and
that's funny.
I don't know how, but it stuck. And so now everybody calls me Theo, and that's Theo. You would not even believe how many times people can mess that up. So when I go through a drive-through, I just say Amy.
Oh, you're kidding. That's so funny.
No, when I go to a place to pick up a pizza or anything, I'll never forget. My daughter was at A&M, and we were there visiting, and we ordered a pizza, and they hollered out, Amy, your pizza. And I started walking up to the counter, and my daughter goes, Mom, they said Amy. And I go, I know, I'm Amy. And so it's just a funny thing because nobody can mess up Amy.
That is so funny. That is so funny.
But they can still mess up Theo. They're like, Theo? And I'm like, no, Theo, like Theodora. Instead, I can't say Theo like Elizabeth.
Except it's not Theodora. It's Thelma Elizabeth. Elizabeth.
So my name has just been, I've always pretty much been a unique person. I was class clown in my high school senior class. I became a school teacher late in life and absolutely loved it. I've always been a writer, but never of a book. I'd always written for newspapers. I'd always written little columns. I'd always written poetry for fun things at school. And I was hospitality director at our high school. I just loved parties and planning and potlucks and prizes.
But you are unique. And that takes me back to, this is one of the things I dog-ear in your book. It's right in the introduction. And this just seems like it goes along with what you're saying. You said, we are following a path picked and planned, perfectly in line with what we think life is going to be like. We attempt to control what is in our grasp until the unpredictability of it all comes crashing down like a delicate crystal glass dropped on a concrete slab.
Yes.
So
I was that glass, and I got thrown to the concrete and shattered in a million pieces. And I kept getting thrown to the concrete and shattered.
You really did. You really did. Can you talk a little bit about, before we go into the tragedies, I got to read your book where you describe in such beautiful prose about your mother and your father and the incredible people that you had raising you. Can you just share a little bit about each of them?
I grew up on the farm, and we had watermelons, cantaloupes, cows, chickens. I was a farm girl, and I was daddy's girl. I was a major daddy's girl. Anytime he was out in the field picking watermelons, I wanted to be, and I would go with him when he would go peddle and sell the watermelons. And I learned so much, like a business savvy in a way. And and I was a mortgage banker for 18 years. I started being a receptionist at a mortgage company right out of high school, and I am very blessed to have had the foundation that I had. I learned with my dad, I learned speaking and public speaking. He was a preacher and a farmer. He preached a small Bible church for 33 years, which he founded and built on my great grandfather's land. And we had as many as 50 members there for a time. Every Sunday morning, it was standing room only. Wonderful. My dad was such a gifted speaker. And I like to say, as I did in the book, he was the Charles Ingalls of our community.
Yes, I love that. I love that picture. I can totally picture that.
Yes, everybody looked to my dad for direction, and everybody looked to my dad in times of despair. When somebody was dying, they called my dad, and he preached so many funerals and married so many people. And my mom was the delicate balance. She was the quiet, soft presence in the corner. She was deaf from a young age. She lost her hearing at 18 months from a high fever. She always made it a point to say it wasn't like Helen Keller's fever, but it was similar. Okay. It wasn't scarlet fever, but it was a very high fever for several days, and it left her at 18 months old completely without sound. It bore its weight in her ears. And she did not speak or communicate beyond hand gestures and body language until she was 10 years old. Wow. And at 10 years old, my grandparents realized we've got to do something. And they sent her to a special school in Waco, Texas, which is about 2 hours from where they lived. And she lived with some dear friends of my grandparents, and she learned how to communicate. And these teachers knew how to teach her. And they knew that she was going to have a communicating life, and she did. She learned how to read lips. She was not taught sign language during that time, but she was taught how to read lips and use her voice. Wow. And so she ended up with a beautiful life. And I don't remember a time that my mom didn't know what was going on. She was the most present one in the room. Daddy was the big presence in the room talking and all that. But we would get home from an event and Daddy would be looking at Mama. Now, who was that? What was that? What did they say? And my mom knew everything that was going on. My mom was the most present one in the room, yet she couldn't hear a thing. So
do you think your mom was ever underestimated by others?
Every day. Wow. Every day. She was completely underestimated. She was like the Wonder Woman in the room, and you didn't know it until she spun around and turned into Wonder Woman.
Right. And, took her glasses off.
Yes.
Wow.
But growing up on the farm was just so wonderful. I had the same parents, never divorced. They would have been married 50 years, but we lost Mama 6 months before that.
That is really tough. What did you do when the 50-year anniversary came around? Did you acknowledge it?
I am so glad you asked me. So glad you asked me that. I heard from my cousin, who was my dad's oldest niece, Elaine. So just to give everybody a little backstory, my uncle, my dad's brother, was 17 years older than my dad. And he was actually headed to World War II when my dad was born in 1943.
Wow.
So all of his children, and he had 7 of them, they all would come play with Daddy stay at my grandmother's, every summer. Right. So Daddy's oldest niece was my dad's age. And she told me at the funeral, she was always thinking of others and thinking ahead. And she said, you need to look into a card shower for their anniversary, a card shower. And so I started looking it up. I had invitations made up with their wedding pictures on it. And I sent it to every person I could find an address for that ever knew my parents. I said, please, during this month, send my dad a letter. I put a pre-stamped envelope in. Please send my dad a card or a letter with your remembrances of he and my mom. Yes. And so there he was, in the house, and he started getting these cards. He's like, I can't believe these people remember when it was our anniversary. And so eventually I let him hang on to that for a while, but eventually I told him that I had sent out this card and I showed it to him and he loved it. And then I made this really pretty box. I went to Hobby Lobby and found this very plain box. And I bought all these little things and hot glued them all on there. And it says Joe and Sue, 50 years. And now when you open the box, and I have the box, it has all these letters and cards from all these people and stories that I never even knew about my parents.
Yes.
And Daddy would reread those over and over. It really helped get him through. And I kept coming up with things to try to get him through the anniversaries and the birthdays and the celebrations.
You know, this is such a good thing. I love hearing what you did, because it is something that gets overlooked a lot when someone has a significant loss, but there's, you know, an upcoming anniversary date. It can happen with children. You know, somebody loses a child before their high school graduation, or, you know, anything like that, where that day that somebody had been looking forward to, that was going to be so special, then becomes a source of great pain and loss. It's so good to acknowledge that day, right?
Yes, I'm all about, of course, I'm a feeler, and we feelers like to feel, even if it's sad.
Yeah.
I love to feel. And Daddy was the same way. You know, Dolly Parton says in Steel Magnolias, laughter through tears is my favorite emotion.
Yeah.
And Daddy said that all the time. He'd just be walking around the house saying that, because it is, because after the great cry another thing Dolly says is you got to get through the rain to see the rainbow.
Yes,
so, you know, we've got to acknowledge the rain in our life and then see that beautiful rainbow, because yes, I cry. And yes, there's some pretty hard times, which I'm sure we're going to discuss. But I think that because of the strong foundation that I had, I'm able to go out and have a voice for grief for other people that did not have the same foundation.
Yes, I agree. That's one of the reasons why I felt like I should start this podcast, because when my husband passed away, and it was just a couple months short of our 25th anniversary, a really big deal.
Yeah.
And like you, I went ahead and actually had a 25th anniversary party for myself, because I wanted to acknowledge what an incredible thing it was that we had been together for 25 years, and you know, still invited the same people.
I'm glad you did that, because even on Mother's Day, I still go and pick out a cake at the bakery. I pick out a cake that I think Mama would have loved, and I eat that cake.
You honor her, yes.
I do. And I make her recipes at Christmas, and I make, you know, and I make Daddy's favorite food. And I still honor them, because, well, we don't ever want our loved ones to be forgotten.
Right.
And I just love to do things like that. But I have met some people along the way that want to push their grief aside.
Right.
And they want to sweep it under the rug. But what I always say to them, if I get the opportunity, is if you do not deal with your grief, it will deal with you. So that makes me think of another part of your book that I had dog-eared. This is what you said on page 29. This is in the chapter about your mother. You said, speaking of uncomfortable things is so important. It's critical to survival and a necessary ingredient for living. If there is one thing we need to learn above everything else, it is that being silent about uncomfortable things only worsens them and causes an effect. By sharing, we belong, and by belonging, we can share. Yes. Mama and Daddy, the reason that there were 1,000 people at my mom's funeral, the reason that the flower shops sold out of flowers in our community for a 74-year-old, that's unheard of. That is because my mom and dad had this beautiful testimony in the community. They didn't just go to the eye doctor. they talked to everybody that worked there and asked what's going on in your life. They didn't just go to the farm service office to get their pastures registered every year. They took peanut brittle to these ladies. And so everywhere they went, they were not just a visit to check off an appointment on the calendar. They went and spent time in these people's lives. And I've had people message me and say, I know your parents from the, whatever office. They would come in, but they were unlike any other people that came in because your dad always knew my name. He always knew what was going on. He always asked me how I was, and he really took time to listen to me.
Yes.
And I feel like we're all floating through life. No, we're not floating. We're in a freaking rapid race. Yeah. And we're just going, and we're not paying attention to anybody around us and asking what's going on in their life. And my mom and dad did that. And so I'm so thankful now that I hear these stories from people that I've never heard, and these wonderful. There was a boy in Hillsborough, I believe, in one of the nursing care facilities, and he was disabled and had a lot of handicaps and disabilities. And a lady came up to me at a speaking event, and she said, I was so glad to see that you're speaking today because I wanted to tell you that your mom and dad visited my son every week. Oh. She said, I lived far away. I believe she lived in Houston or San Antonio. She said, but I couldn't be with him here. We wanted him in this facility because this was the best one. And your mom and dad lived close, so they visited him every week. And she said, I didn't even know who they were until I came to visit him one day. And I saw them in there, and your dad's laughing, and your mom's bent down talking in his ear because he was deaf. And so, see, Mama and Daddy did these things. So when they leave this earth, there's a loss there. And all these people are reaching out to me because I'm the next thing they can tell. And so I start thinking, what are you listeners doing? And I'm talking to myself too. What are you doing in your life right now that someday when you're gone, people are going to tell your loved ones that you were doing? That is what it's about. It's about leaving a legacy and helping people while you're here. And when you're gone, there's a loss. There's a definite feeling that person's gone. So I know that my purpose in all of this, and I'm sure we'll tell the story of everything soon, my purpose, beyond the shadow of a doubt, the two most important days, I believe it was Mark Twain that said the two most important days of your life, the day you were born and the day you know why you were born. I know beyond the shadow of a doubt, I was born to write that book. And with that book, I'm able to help other people with the story of Joe, Bob, and Sue, my parents.
Yes. Thank you for that. Well, and something that comes up a few times in the book is this need you had to acknowledge that they had lived, right? They lived, they impacted the world. And what you're sharing with me is just the evidence that they lived. It was written on the hearts of all the people that they interacted with. And that is a message that is super powerful. That's something that no matter what we've been through, no matter what grief we've experienced, if it causes us to open our eyes more to the people around us, to care, to notice, to spend extra time, then it increases that footprint, that evidence that we lived, right? And then all those people who they had blessed turned to bless you. And that was my experience also. I feel like I was incredibly blessed because I had a good family relationship, because I had friends, because, we had been able to cultivate some close bonds with people, And in my case, I feel like that was completely also due to the fact that my husband had been widowed when we met. So through his experience as a young widower, his eyes were open to the fact that there was suffering around, that you care more when you've experienced things. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what happened with your parents
Yes.
Because I know, because it factors very strongly into the grief, and complicated grief is something that you
Oh,
talk
yeah.
about. And I think we should talk about that since you understand it.
Yeah. Oh, gosh, do I. I was baptized by fire, so to speak. I was a high school English teacher, Waxahachie, Texas. We were out for the summer. And I literally, the day before this all came down, I was thinking how wonderful my life was. I had a successful husband. I had a beautiful home in the country. I had a wonderful dog, a wonderful daughter. And then July 29th, 2019, I got a phone call that there'd been an accident on our family farm, and my parents had been peanut farmers in north central Texas. When I got to the farm, which was about an hour away, I learned that my father had accidentally run over my mother with one of the farm tractors, and it killed her instantly. And I don't remember what happened right, immediately after that, but I do remember that Daddy was inconsolable in the ambulance, and I stayed with him. I took family leave because school was going to be starting soon. So I got my class. I taught 10th grade. So I got my kids all with a great substitute that took over and started the year off with them. And I would do videos and send to the class. But I stayed with Daddy for about 6 weeks and made sure he was going to be okay. And then I did eventually get back to that life, only to find out that my husband had been having an affair during my grief. Everybody grieves in their own way, but the one that you think is going to be there for you the most, you realize is there for you the least. And that really knocked me to my shower floor. I remember laying in the shower for hours, just letting the water run until it got cold, and just thinking, what is going on? God, what are you doing? Why,
Right.
why are you doing this? It's like he was like taking everything out of my life that mattered.
Right.
And then a few months after that, my counselor, Gail, who I talk about a lot in the book, she died suddenly. And she'd been a great friend of mine for 18 years.
Right.
Minor life things like raising a teenage daughter and just blended family stuff, but never something like this. So I was thankful I had her from July until February. She died February of the next year, 2020. And then moved back towards the farm and living close to the farm. And about 3 years, it was almost 3 years exactly. It was Father's Day of 2022. I went to check on Daddy and take him breakfast, and I found he had taken his life. So I, of course, didn't think, about the book at all. I'd been taking notes and journaling, but I had gotten to a point with a publisher where I was going to publish a grief book.
Right. Based on the grief with your mother.
Right. And Daddy
husband.
knew. Yeah. Daddy knew I was working on a grief book, and he knew it was about Mama. And, I was a little worried about Daddy reading it. I never talked about it much with him because I didn't want to hurt him anymore. We always talked about funny things, and Daddy was such a funny person. So we'd tell jokes and watch Family Ties and stuff like that. And, we never talked. And he always said, I'm doing okay if I don't think deep. If I don't think deep. And his white matter disease had gotten worse. It had really gotten bad to where his mobility was almost completely gone. But his brain was still functioning very well. So he was trapped in that body with those remembrances of the accident, and it was too much. And I always say, you will hear people say, listen to me, folks, you will hear people say, God won't give you more than you can handle. I'm a preacher's daughter, so this is coming straight from the Bible. That is not biblical. That is not, you will hear people say that, and you can say, Theo said that is not biblical. What the Bible is talking about, and we can get into that on another podcast, is temptation. He will not give you more temptations than you can handle.
Yes, thank you for that very good lesson.
Yes.
You are absolutely right.
But guess what? God may give you more than you can handle, but that does not mean that it's not still part of his plan. Yes. And of course, at the time, I could not see that because everything was dark. But as that, I like to say it's like black paint that covers you, and eventually it dries and pieces of it start to chip away, and that's where the light comes in. And it took a while for that light to come in, but I told my publishers after my dad died, I came to the Zoom with not a Kleenex, not a wash rag, it was a towel, and we all cried, and I was just carrying a towel around the house, just carrying this towel like Linus carried his blanket. And I was wiping my tears as I just walked around the house. And it was so crazy because I realize now that I was grieving my mom at the time my dad passed. Because I'd put a lot of that on hold because I didn't want daddy to see me hurting so bad, which would hurt him more.
Right.
So I was putting that grief off and getting back to my life. But then when daddy died, it's like I was grieving both of them. But I did have the Zoom with the publishers. And then I told the publishers, I'll just have to not finish this book. I have no idea. I don't know what's going to happen. And then guess what? I ended up writing again because that was my outlet for my grief, writing. So I wrote, and daddy fit so perfectly in the book. He fit so perfectly. And I realized daddy never did anything without mama, and mama never did anything without daddy. So they had to be together in that book. But it wasn't until many, many months later, even after the book came out, that I didn't realize that Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for good for them that love God. And all things for God does not mean all good things. He didn't say all good things work together for good. He said all things work together for good. And that can be all bad things. And he turns them around to make them good. And so now I feel like the book is the good. And the book is going out and helping people. So even in my parents' death, they are still ministering to people. Isn't that beautiful?
Yes. I love that you brought that out. And I love that idea that it is all things. And this world, this life is full of black and white, positive, negative, right? Painful, joyful.
Yes, people, I know you're out there and you're thinking, my grief is not like yours. Let me tell you why I titled it that. Because early on after the loss of my mom, a lot of well-intentioned friends and family were coming to the house, bringing tons of food and bringing tons of unsolicited advice.
Yes.
And I heard many times, when I lost my mom, here's what I did. And that's very sweet, and I appreciated it. But if your mom didn't get run over by a tractor that your dad was driving, I can't talk to you because I cannot relate to you if your mom was in a hospital bed with you holding her hand and I didn't get to say goodbye. So I can't relate to, and so all these people would bring me books and I would get the book and I would flip fast through the pages, just flip, looking for the page that hit me as hard as I'd been hit. And I couldn't find it. So I decided, you know what? I just have to write it. And I decided I'm going to title it How I've Been Feeling. And these words that keep repeating in my head, my grief is not like yours. My grief is not like yours. And I titled it that. So not so that people get it and read about my grief. I titled it that so that when you got the book, you could own that title for yourself and you could write your own pain on the pages.
Yes. And you do that in the book. I've never quite seen the exact template like this, where you go through a chapter, you share some things that you've learned, and then you have these think points. For example, exercise in learning to live. Write down a good memory from before your loss. Now write down an experience you've had since your loss. It can be as simple as a good cup of coffee, a funny conversation, or a good night's sleep. If you can do this once a week, it will help to blend the life you once had with the life you have now. And this is in each chapter. There's, it's the school teacher that comes out in you.
Unfortunately.
Right? But these wonderful prompts to where somebody can reflect in a positive way.
To get people to get their pain out of inside them and get it onto a page.
Yes. And I appreciated one of the things that you had written about your interaction with Gail, your therapist, right after your father had passed, and she encouraging you to listen to what he had to say, no matter what it is, because that is where he's holding his pain. But you also then mention how there are times when you don't need a Bible verse. You don't need somebody to come with the profound theological understanding that is appreciated later when you're in a better space. Sometimes you really need to feel and hold the pain. I mean, even Christ did that, right?
Yeah.
He felt and held that pain so much that he had to be comforted by an angel.
Yes.
So there are times when you just are going to have to feel it.
I think so too. But in this society, that's not something that is accepted. And unfortunately, we Americans we are not very tolerant of grievers.
Mm.
We don't have a free space to grieve. I mean, what does bereavement look like now? Is it a day or two of paid leave? That's it,
Right.
And so
Right.
eventually, I'm not sure I'll have to talk to you about this, but eventually would like to get the Boyd bill passed. And that's my last name. I want the Boyd bill, and I want it to be a bigger, better, it's all B words, bigger bereavement with a Boyd bill.
Yes.
I want
Yes.
more extensive bereavement for those that have suffered tragic loss. Can you imagine losing a child and knowing you got to go back to work to help feed the family?
Oh, yeah.
And you ought to be given more than a few days in a tragic loss situation. And what companies will see, and this is what my research study shows, is that after they start to address not the symptoms of grief, but the cause of grief, and which is the person, and treat that person with, I don't want to say gloves on, but give them some TLC.
Yes.
They're going to see a better return in the workplace, more creative minds, more alert minds, more present bodies at work.
Right.
A lot of our grievers are grieving in silence, especially the Gen Zers, these young kids. They're grieving in silence. They're the highest percentage on my research study that, by the way, is amazing. It's called The State of Grief in America. And it's coming out in the second book. And with a pre-order of that book, you will be able to download the entire research study from my website. And in the book, I'll have a lot of the wow stats, which were kind of jaw-dropping.
Oh, I'm really looking forward to that. Tell me again the website that we should go to.
My website is thinktheo.com, ThinkTheo.com. And we don't have everything finished out yet for the research and the second book. But currently on my website is a look at me. I've got some merchandise on there. I've got my first book. Yeah. And you can sign up for my newsletter.
Can you talk about this research project? How did you even get this done, and where was the research done? What is the research?
I was at a speaker training last year, and I know those of you out there are thinking, gosh, this girl can talk. She doesn't need speaker training, but yes, I do. I go quite often with a company that I'm a part of, Brand Builders Group in Nashville, Tennessee, and I do speaker training and all kinds of training, book launch training and all this stuff. And they had a guest speaker come. His name's Jason Dorsey. And this guy's like paid astronomical amounts of money to go speak. And, he's just great. Well, he's founder and owner of the Center of Generational Kinetics out of Austin, Texas. Okay. So after he got through talking, I went up and talked to him. And I said, have you ever done a research study on grief? And it had never even crossed my mind until in that moment. And I realized as a school teacher, I tell my students, you can't learn from things until we know the facts about things. And here we are as a society, and we're trying to figure grief out in the mental health crisis. And guess what? I just did it. Julie, I just did it. I went all in. I spent as much on this research study as my first house cost me.
That's
and
awesome.
I just did it. Anderson Cooper hasn't done it. Oprah Winfrey hasn't done it. 60 Minutes has not done it. This is a in-depth research study that took almost a year to complete, and it just came in, and it is mind-blowing. Wow. And to see how the grief crisis in America, it was no shock to me. I was not shocked, but then I was shocked. Because It's actually in black and white. It's like something's going on, but then when you know the truth of it, you're like, whoa, I hate
Right.
to give this example, but I kind of knew my husband was having an affair, but until I really knew it, it didn't hit me. So it's the
Right.
same with the research. So now that I know it, what am I going to do with it? And I have to, and he told me, Jason Dorsey said, a lot of people get the research done and they never do anything with it. Well, guess what, girl? I'm doing something with it. And when you see how the grief crisis in America is playing directly into the mental health crisis in America, how many times do we hear people say, oh, we're in a mental health crisis for sure. Oh, we are in a grief crisis. Oh, I can't grieve at work. Oh, I have to. But what are we doing about it? We're not
Right.
doing anything. So we have to take
Right.
the research and the science behind it and figure out what we're going to do. And that's what I'm doing with sharing these statistics, hoping to get on more stages and in front of more screens and more podcasts so that I can
Yes.
explain to people what's going on, so I can give you some tips on how to move on from this. And how, first thing that I'm going to tell people is talk to a counselor. And another thing that I want to try to help in America is counseling should be covered by all insurance.
Mm.
Counseling, that is the most important organ in your body, is your brain.
Mm.
Your heart's important, your liver's important, and we all go get those things checked out, don't we? We're checking our A1C, and we're checking our cholesterol, and we're checking, but how many of us are going weekly or monthly to have our brain checked with a person that is trained in whatever loss or trauma we've been through? If you are not getting the help you need in your mind, in your mindset, and your mental clarity, then you are not going to be able to move forward successfully in life. If anything, you're going to become a shooter or become, and if you look at the
Mm.
shooters in the history, they've all lost something. It might not have been a person, but I think the man that recently shot the CEO of the insurance company, he had lost his mobility. He wasn't able to go
Oh,
out with the same surfer group, I believe, in Hawaii where he lived. He lost all those
right.
friends.
So you're saying that the mental health crisis is directly related to grief. And because we as a society don't know how to
Grief.
manage grief
Yep.
or to even support each other
We don't
as
know
we
how to
grieve.
grieve, and we don't know how to support a griever. And I'm just tired of it. I'm tired of talking about it. It's just time to do something about it.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And this is what you were put on the earth to do.
It is, and I'm so glad you said that, because when I was teaching school, I had several teachers come in and observe, and they'd say, this is what you were meant to do, teach school. And it is. If these things hadn't happened in my life, that is still where I'd be, in front of those 10th grade students, trying to
Yeah,
change their life so that they'll
yeah,
always remember me when I go through a drive-through and they're waiting on me, or when I see them years later at a bookstore or a book event and they come to see me. And I still have pen pals. I still write a couple of my creative writing students. But yes, that was what I was meant to be. But as with life, purpose changes.
yeah,
So my purpose at that time was those kids. But
yeah.
now, rather than speaking to about 158 kids my last class, not all at the same time, people. I had, periods where they come in and out. But now I can go speak to 1,500 people, or maybe even more in the future, and try to change
Right,
those lives. And
right.
if we don't start addressing this problem, which is the Gen Zers and these young kids that are not grieving, they may be grieving on social media, but they're not going and talking about it. They're hiding it. They're not dealing with it. And then they're going to have children. Where are we going to be in 20 more years? If we're already in a grief crisis now, where are we going to be?
Why do you think it's normal for us to believe that we shouldn't experience difficult these? Why do we believe we shouldn't be subject to grief?
I think in America, in this society, we've just become so superficial. We're just all about the outside and what it looks like. And we don't ever think about the inside. And we don't think about, it's just like alcoholism. We don't ever, people, that's kind of a taboo thing. Oh, I think you're drinking too much. And then you're immediately defensive. Oh, are
Mm.
you still sad? Why are you still sad? I got that so often. I also got,
Wow.
you're depressed, you're suicidal. And I'm like just screaming inside. I am not depressed. I'm not suicidal. I'm just sad. When did sad become so bad?
Right.
Why can't we
Yeah.
just be okay with sad? And I'm
Yeah.
just grieving. And honestly, I wish we wore black veils so that
Mm-hmm.
when I was in the grocery store, somebody would see the black veil and they would just know
Mm-hmm.
Theo's still grieving. So we're not going to
Yes.
bother her right now. But instead,
Yes.
I get, oh, Howard, I see that your book's doing so good. Or I see that you're just moving on so good. I'm so, and that's so good. And I'm proud that those people want to reach out and tell me. But I wish that they just would know that just going up and down the aisle of the grocery store, it's like that book Crying in H Mart. I'm crying down every aisle because I'm back in my hometown after 30 years. I'm shopping in the same grocery store that my mom shopped in, and I'm just
Yes.
trying to get through the grocery store.
Yes.
Hey, lady, I'm
Yes.
just trying to get some tuna fish and some bread. I'm trying to
Yeah.
make it through this store without
Yes.
breaking down and losing it on the cookie aisle, thinking of Daddy wanting all these cookies and thinking of the funny
Right.
stories Daddy would tell when we went to the grocery store. On the
Right.
cereal aisle, he'd say, just take all these boxes and we shred them all up and then we're a serial killer. I mean, Daddy was just full of stuff like that. So all this is going through my mind, and I wish I had a black veil on so that I could
Yes.
kind of be respected in a moment where I'm still grieving.
Yes, you're right. You're right. Yeah, because we don't have it, we don't have very well defined rituals around grief
No, we never
culturally.
have. In the old days, Mom even said, when somebody died, then the next day you're back in the field working.
Wow.
We've always just been that way. There was no time taken off for
Yeah.
grieving. Whereas in other countries, I mean, they shut it down,
Mm.
and they take time and they wail and they carry on and they have
Right.
outward emotions. And now, I even remember I speak at a lot of funerals, which I actually enjoy. So definitely reach out to me. If you're willing to fly me in, I'll write a poem based on the obituary and I'll also read it at the funeral. I love doing this. I can take an obituary, I write a beautiful poem. It's a gift I was given from my dad. He wrote
Mm.
beautiful sermons and funeral messages and poetry. And I've written quite a few poems that are going to be in the second book, actually. I'm including a few of them in the
Nice.
second book that I've read at funerals.
Nice.
But I love a good funeral. I can critique a funeral. I've probably went to 3,000 in my life because my dad was a preacher and we always went with Mom and Daddy. So I was always at funerals. But I have learned how to read people at funerals.
Mm.
And I've heard this over and over. It never fails. I will always see this at a funeral. There's a woman or even a man crying and they immediately apologize that they're crying. I'm so sorry I'm crying. I'm so sorry. Kelly Ripa did it recently on a social media post. They lost their dog and
Oh,
she's
yeah.
on their show with her husband, Mark Consuelos, and she lost this dog they've had forever. I was crying because I'd watched the video. And she kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. So
Yeah.
somebody commented on that, by the way, and said, when are we going to quit saying I'm sorry for crying?
Right. Right.
I'm sorry I'm smiling. I'm sorry I'm happy. We don't do that.
Right.
So we got to quit apologizing for sad. Sad
Yeah.
is okay.
And
Go talk to a counselor.
I like your idea that sad doesn't have to equal depressed. Clinical depression is a medical condition, but being sad is a normal human emotion.
Yes, and my counselor, Gail, was so wonderful. And she asked me several questions and put me through some complicated grief training, which I'm going to talk about real quickly. So, regular
Yes.
grief, about 70% of America is grieving, whether it's a loss of a job, a pet, maybe more than that, maybe 80% by
Right.
now. Well, out of that 70% or 80%, about 7% will experience complicated grief. And regular grief looks like going to a funeral, taking a day off work, maybe the afternoon, going to a restaurant on the way home, having a margarita, going back to work the next day. You're sad, but you're still functioning. You get over it. Complicated grief, you don't even remember where you work. You don't even remember you have a job. You have lost everything. You are absolutely just blown away that you've lost someone and your equilibrium is shattered. I remember busting my arm open out on the farm just 2 days after my mom's accident because I was driving too fast. I hit a plow that was hidden under the weeds and it busted my arm. And then what a great metaphor, these plows hidden under weeds that are waiting to devour us. I remember that part of the book. And so what we now I forgot. I do this all the time.
Well, you were talking about the complicated grief.
Oh, complicated grief. So regular grief, we go to the funeral, we take a day off work, we're sad, but we get over it. Complicated grief, we can't even remember. We don't even know there's a funeral. It's so hard. I banged my car into my sister's car that week. I busted my elbow. So many things happened because my whole body was off. It was like I'd been through some time machine and everything had stopped and I didn't realize life was still going on and it was so difficult. So I did go through some complicated grief counseling and it was so helpful. And Gail asked me several very specific questions and she said at the end, you're not depressed. You're not suicidal. You're just sad. And so that's why it's so important you talk to somebody that is trained in your specific type of loss, your specific type of grief, so that you get the right feedback and help that you need. And if you can't afford counseling, go talk to a pastor at a church, go talk to a very good friend, go talk to somebody that you can get it out because you've got to get it out of you and away from your eating you alive.
I really appreciate that. I want to read a couple things that you wrote in the book about complicated grief. This is on page 83. No matter what the cause of the death is, the way we react or don't react to it determines whether we are in a state of grief or complicated grief.
Yes.
So, and then you said complicated grief is not only the way a person reacts to the loss, but it can be caused by how they lost that person. Sudden, tragic, unexpected. In other words, complications get in the way of adapting to the loss.
Yes.
That was very, very key and helpful for me. Because in my own situation, my husband had been sick for a long time, but he had been stable for a long time.
Yeah.
And then a turn of events, he developed antibodies to this condition or to the medication that was suppressing this autoimmune condition that he had. And as soon as the antibodies began, his health spiraled downward just as fast as a race car. It was just every week there was something new, some new complication. He was diagnosed with cancer during that time, on top of the autoimmune disease. He was being treated for it. And then he died during the night, while I was asleep. And the fact that he had been sick for a long time, but had always kind of overcome and, maybe he would have a setback, but then he'd get better again. In my mind, that was just the course of his life. He was, he was always going to pull through and it was always going to be fine. So it was extremely shocking and very, very difficult to work through. I ended up doing something called EMDR. It's a type of trauma therapy.
Is that where they put the things on your head?
So what it is, it's eye movement, desensitization, and I always forget the R.
Yes, I've heard of this.
So what happens is because each side of your brain, functions kind of independently. Your eyes, one eye is connected to one side of the brain, the other eye is connected to the other side of the brain. By having both of those, so they do it in different ways. They can use lights where your eyes shift from side to side. Sometimes they will tap on sides of they'll tap on your leg, each side. it causes your brain to come together to look at a memory. And as it's looking at the memory, working together, it kind of keeps that fight or flight response from taking over. And so in that state, you can process the emotion and process the memory and see things in a more clear, logical way. Because otherwise what happens is you go back into that stress response, that fight, flight, freeze. And you cannot process grief when you are in a heightened stress state.
Right. I'm actually going next week. I mean, I feel like I'm doing really well with my grief and everything I'm doing, but I'm going next week to this microcurrent neurofeedback. If there's one thing that's kind of happened to me since all the trauma is I have kind of developed a little bit of ADHD. And I feel
Trauma
like
changes your brain. Trauma changes your brain.
It does. And I used to be able to sit down and knock out something and without getting up. And now I have to reward myself. People out there listening, I have to get 10 plain M&Ms and lay them out. And as I write a chapter for the second book, and as I write, or 2 paragraphs, I get an M&M. I wrote 2 more paragraphs. Now I'm going to eat 2 M&Ms. And, that's a dopamine feed, I believe. But my brain is a little off. And so this microcurrent neurofeedback is supposed to help neurological conditions, autism, anxiety, depression, migraines, addiction, concussion, sleep disorders, and many more. I'm very healthy. Self-care is my new hobby. And I've kind of done that because I realized I have one daughter. She's 26 years old. She lives in Houston, Texas. She passed the bar and she's a criminal defense attorney now.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yes,
wonderful.
But I don't want her to have to take care of me when I get older, and I'll be 53 in April. Well, we're in April now. I'll be 53 this month. So I want to take care of myself. So self-care is my hobby. So in that, I tell people all the time in your grief, be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself. Be gentle with yourself. Be kind to yourself. I had no idea what Gail was asking me to do. I was like, what are you talking about? Be kind to myself. Like, hello, Theo, how are you? She goes, no, just if you can't make an event or do something that you always have done, it's okay. Just say, no, I'm not going to make it. Or if you can't entertain somebody that wants to come visit, it's okay. Just say, I can't meet you today. I'm so sorry. But that is also a slippery slope, folks. Because you don't want to get to the point, which I did, where I didn't want anybody around except my dog.
Right.
You've got to still get up sometimes, make your bed, put on your makeup, and get out. Because it is very good to still get out and live. We are all still here for a reason. There's a reason you're still here. Life is for the living. And we've got to still do something with that life. Try to make an impact. And if it's not for somebody else, do it for yourself. And anyway, that's kind of my spiel. But the second book is called Hope All the Way. And it's about all the signs that Mama, Daddy, and God have sent me since my mom died. And it's filled with these beautiful signs that show that I am on the right path, that show that I am here for a reason. And I hope that people will enjoy it. I'm excited about it. It releases in December. Pre-sales will be available soon. And you can go to thinktheo.com and sign up for my newsletter. And I was sending out a monthly newsletter. Right now it's seasonal. But when I do a newsletter, guys, it's really good because I give away free stuff. Because I'm still that party planner from the high school. I'm still the hospitality person. I'm just doing it in a different way.
Something that came to mind while you and I were talking, I thought about how, especially the self-care, you and I, we're both women in our 50s. We have a lot of control over providing self-care. What do you think we do for children, young adults? They experience loss and grief, and they might not have the same resources. What would you suggest?
They absolutely need to be seeing a counselor. They need to be talking to a child psychologist or child counselor, even a counselor at their school. If they cannot afford counseling, talk to a counselor at the school. Get a mentor for that child, another maybe a child from the high school that has lost someone that has made it through can mentor a child in elementary that has lost someone.
I love
And
that.
maybe we start
Yes.
partnering in schools that way. Like
Yes.
rather than partnering in, what are you going to do when you graduate? I'm going to partner with you. Let's partner with somebody like a big sister, little sister program.
I love that.
Big brother, sorry, big brothers,
I love that idea. Yeah, and like you brought up before, not all grief, not all loss is due to death.
No, there's a loss of a job, a loss of a spouse, my divorce. I cried as hard for that as anything because I lost what I thought was going to be forever.
Right.
The loss
and the child in a situation like that has the grief of the loss of their parents being in one home together, and
very loss of a life that they knew. And that's kind of what, when your world's changing, you're experiencing loss, when your world's completely changing. And I knew after everybody went back home after the funeral, and I knew I was the one that was going to stay with Daddy, I knew my life was changing.
Yes. I love the part of the book where you talked about the date, that date that your mother
July
passed
29th,
away.
2019. I didn't even want to write it on the paper.
That's what you said. I didn't want to write that date. I didn't even want to see it written on the paper. It coats me like a bucket of black paint, pouring itself slow and steady. With each hour that passes, the weight of darkness presses down harder until I am completely covered. Like mosquitoes that return every spring and sharp grass burns that sprout each summer, it doesn't go away. That it's so descriptive of that feeling. That is heavy. But I wanted to read this. This is so descriptive how you talk about grief here. Grief is the table that holds all the feelings. Those of you in these dark days have taken a seat like an unwelcome guest, required to stay, not wanted, and desperately wishing you could walk away. We don't want anything on this table. We don't want to be here as much as it doesn't want us. We are taught to love and belong to people, but then all of a sudden, when the person you loved and belonged to most is gone, there is no one to tell you what you are supposed to do. You just sit at that table, huh?
Yeah, in that, I hate that there has to be a grief book.
Yeah.
I wish there didn't have to be a grief book. But as trite as this sounds, God has a plan for your life.
Yes.
And as sinful beings and being in this world filled with sin, things are going to happen. But we have to decide in those moments, are we going to stay on the shower floor, letting the water continue to just cover us? Or are we going to get up, dry off, put on some clothes, and go out and try to help not just somebody else, but help ourselves and get out there? And in doing that, you are helping others.
Yes.
One of the best gifts you can give your friends and family is to take care of yourself. Don't be a burden. Get out there and take care of yourself. That's the one thing that you can do. I say all the time, I just wish everybody in my life would take care of themselves. And then I won't have to worry quite as much.
That is true. But then it does help if you know that somebody's wearing that black veil right then.
Yeah.
Right.
Because then you're going to recognize other people with a black veil.
Yeah.
And it's easier to recognize them because they've got a black veil on.
That's
and
right.
You could go up and just give them a hug and not say a word.
Yeah.
Some of the most memorable moments for me in my grief or when people would just show up and sit with me or just be in my house while I went and laid down, no words spoken. Everybody in America thinks you got to do this big thing, the biggest spray of flowers. I got to send them the biggest basket of fruit. I'm going to take them the biggest meal. I'm going to do this, 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 this. They're a do. All you have to do is be present. That's it. That's all you have to do is be. You don't have to say any big thing. You don't have to do any big thing. You just have to be present so that they know somebody's there with them. That's it.
Yeah. It is a tremendous help to help somebody then be able to move forward and
my mom
have
was a
some kind of
perfect
hope.
example of that. My mom couldn't hear a thing, yet she was the most present one in the room.
I love that. This has been such a good discussion. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to get your next book and to see the research. And again, I loved your book. My Grief Is Not Like Yours. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you. I appreciate you so much taking the time to read it. And it's such a better podcast when you've read the book.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
And thank you. Thanks for taking the time to visit with me. I've really loved it. And let's just end with the last question. What do you think it means to grieve well?
It means showing up, not just for others, but yourself every single day and making a commitment. Commit is my word for 2025. Commit to healing. And healing will look different for everyone. Hence, my grief is not like yours. My healing is not like yours. But show up for yourself every day. It could be 1 cup of coffee and you just sit there and you drink it and you're just present in the moment. It could be like I said in the book, it could be sitting with a friend. It could be a visit to a nursing home to just go and put a smile on other people's face. Just show up for yourself. And when you do that, you will be there for others.
I love that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie. I really appreciated it. We had a good talk.
I know it was good. Let's keep in touch.
Yes, please. I'd love to come back and talk about the second book.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.